Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever is going on. Good Monday. It's Monday here, start of the work week, and we're doing a little bit things differently today than we have in the past. We are working on some podcast stuff, but we're going to be doing a little bit of the visual side of things. And I thought today was a really good day to sort of compare the tools that I get asked about most often. Specifically, it's between Capture One and Lightroom Desktop. It's not so much Photoshop. Photoshop sort of reigns supreme at the top of the pyramid upon which it sits. And that would be the realm of software packages that offer, really in-depth post-processing and manipulation, right? Like Photoshop has so little to do these days with straight photo, basic photo manipulation as it does with really advanced type of things. And, programs like Capture One and Lightroom, they try to cater to the photographer who's more apt to getting things right, in camera, and just to do a little bit of color correction and some spot removal. And then they then have some more advanced pieces of, options or whatever inside of the both. It just goes on and on and on. I mean, at this point, if you're watching this video, hopefully you know the differences between something like Photoshop and Lightroom and Capture One. They're similar, but they definitely live in two completely different worlds. So Capture One just got updated today. Actually, I think it's like 20.1. Let's go find out. Can we find out? Help about Capture One. Well, whatever it is, here it says build 14.3 whatever. But all I know is that today this is, Capture One 21 Pro. And here it is. And it was just released today. So we're going to be focusing on that. Let me move my microphone. And we're also going to be looking at the most recent version of Lightroom Classic, which is the 10.3 release. And I think this was updated last month. This is the release version that gave us the enhanced viewer, basically content up-resing. Enhanced up-resing. So that's pretty cool. So let's get into these guys real quick. So, without any more talking about stuff, let's just get into it. The big thing is, I've noticed about these two programs, when you talk to somebody, when people love Lightroom or they love Capture One, it's because of one of two things. For the most part, people love Lightroom because it's digital asset management, meaning like this library here is way better than anything that Capture One has. When you import a file with Lightroom Classic, it's already automatically going into dated folders. I think you have some ability to sort of rename those folders and sort of do your own thing, but for the most part, I always use the default. And it's nice because not only does everything kind of go in that sort of organized manner, that chronological order, which is really, really handy, but it also kind of becomes a calendar in some ways, right? Like, for instance, you can do it in the manner in which it was created. You'd be like, oh, I need photos from, July 4th of 2019, and all you have to do is go to the 2019 folder and then scroll down to July 4th, and there's all your folders. I mean, it's that easy. All your photos are right there. With Capture One, it can be really, really, really complicated. Like when you import things with Capture One, let's just go to a new folder here. We'll just pick like any random folder here, and you can already see it's like Capture One. I mean, like with these two programs going, things are already starting to crawl. Okay, so this is a product shoot I did a while ago. But you have all these really weird things like add to catalog or 2021. Well, it's like, okay, what does that even mean? It's like, all right, well, I guess I'm adding it there. But actually, maybe what I really want to do is I want to add it to catalog, but the selected album, well, was that the selected album? Include subfolders, exclude duplicates, recent imports only. Like, it gets so confusing. It gets so confusing. You don't have that problem with Lightroom. With Lightroom, it's like over on the right side, it just says importing, and whatever you specified last, which is usually like the folder of the year that you're in, 2021, it's just going to automatically put things in the correct folders underneath it. It's going to create the folders, and it's going to name the folders by month and date. It's already inside, you know, it's there as a subfolder within the year. It's just so easy. This can just be it can be so insane. It can just be so insane. Now here I've started to set up sample paths, and it will try to do what I've asked it to do, but it can just be a massive pain in the butt. And then it's also another massive pain in the butt when you try to find your images later on, and you're like, where's my 2021 catalog? Is this it? There's a photography one. Is this it? Wait, but this is different. Is this it? It's the Data Asset Manager in Capture One is garbage. And I'm really surprised when they said there was a new update. The first thing I thought was, if this Data Asset Manager is fixed, then Capture One could possibly be better than Lightroom. All right? So if the Data Asset Manager, or as some people like to call it, the DAM, if that is so terrible, then why do people use Capture One? Well, a lot of people think that Capture One handles things like colors a whole lot better. So what I've done here, I think, let's just make sure. Yep, I've reset this image so that way it has no settings. I've reset this image so that way it has no settings. And so what you're looking at here are the settings of the two files, or of the same file. And they're named differently because I have Lightroom set to basically copy these as a DNG file, whereas this one here is just going to keep it as a RAW. But these are the same two files. But when you import them, so these are at their basic, these are at their program defaults. This is the Lightroom default. This is the Capture One default. And if you look between the two, right off the bat, off of import, I actually think the Capture One looks better. And it's literally because of this import, this one single thing, that a lot of people feel like Capture One has better color control. Of course, the irony is that we're not going to stop here. We're going to tweak both of these images at some point. You know, whether you import it in one program or another, you're going to tweak it a little bit, most likely, to get it to exactly where you want it. So a lot of people are basing it off of the initial import, where the initial import sort of doesn't mean anything, but there is a valid argument saying that, you know, if you're starting off in a better place, chances are you'll end up in a better place. Is that true? Yeah, it could be. It certainly starts you off in a better headspace. How much different are these two? Well, let's take a look here. Using Windows, we can sort of cut these two. Doink. And then I've already got Photoshop open. Let's go ahead and paste that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the Lightroom piece here, paste it, and let's see. I think I can match these up. I mean, that was pretty close. All right. So there we go. I think we've got them matched up. So if I go like this and let's just, can I crop? There we go. All right. So this is the Lightroom, what we're looking at here. I'll name this layer LR. We'll name this C1. And let's just switch between them. Like, you can see a massive difference. You can see a massive difference in color shift. And what might even be easier is, let's just do this. I'm gonna grab a little marquee like that, and that's just a target. And then let's grab our eyedropper tool, and we're in the Lightroom one here. Let's just do like a square. Oh, actually, don't want to mess things up. Let me go switch the colors around. Now let's go over here to this one. Now we're in the Capture One. So now in my color palette, the background, I just switched them over. The background is the Capture One, and the foreground is the Lightroom, okay? So what we'll do is the following. We can just come here, make a new layer. Lightroom, deselect, create another one. Or better yet, we can just go like this. And there's Capture One. I don't know if you can see the difference between these two. Maybe I can just lighten them up a little. Oops. Just kind of lightening them up so you can just see how big of a difference. So Lightroom over here, Capture One. So Lightroom looks a little more, has a lot cooler green. This one has a lot warmer green. And if we go back to our two programs here, remember Capture One is on the left, Lightroom is on the right, so it's kind of flipped. But you can see that this is warmer. The Capture One imports warmer, and the Lightroom doesn't. But playing around with this, I've noticed something, okay? Now, this is importing a profile right off the bat. And the profiles are, I think it's under color here. And here it is. When you import this, it's automatically giving us the generic EOS 5D Mark III. And this was shot on a Mark III, 5D Mark III. And this one just comes in with the Adobe color. However, if we go over here and I say, let's take this down to the camera matching standard. Like all of these are the camera matching profiles. If we go to the camera matching standard, which I prefer, the colors are still different. The Adobe one is much cooler still than the Capture One, but I'm actually liking this profile on the Canon a little more. Does that make sense? So I guess my point here is, just to be clear so people don't get confused, Capture One has a very specific profile it's importing your pictures to. Even though both these programs work with the same raw file, Capture One's profile makes it a little bit warmer, whereas I think is more appealing. It's got more contrast. It's more than just warmer. It's got more contrast, probably a couple different things going on there than Lightroom. But you know, it's just different. However, if you are savvy enough to go into the camera profiles for your camera and you want to go to the camera matching, like I use these all of the time in Adobe Lightroom. And so I'm never using, and this would be true even over here in Capture One, but in Lightroom, since Lightroom is, I should say right now, is my main tool, I always use these. And these always give me a much better footing because I'm going to edit it, these give me a better starting point. So I like this. I like the standard this. You know what I'm saying? Like, I like the way this looks. If we zoom in a little bit on both of these, you'll see they've got approximately the same level of detail. They're handling everything really nice. But, oh, this is crazy. And we'll hold off for a second. Let's just look. Now, you know, the way that Capture One and Lightroom sort of handles their highlights, you can see these, even though Lightroom is still a little bit more green and you're going to get a lot of that from the shadows, the highlights are really close now. The highlights are really close. And the one thing I just wanted to add is that one of the biggest differences, one of the major nuances between Lightroom and Capture One is that they handle shadows and highlights completely differently. If I remember this correctly, Lightroom is more of a shadow-based program, and Capture One is more of a highlight-based program. And let me see if I can... I think that's true. Or maybe it was the opposite. Yes, I'm sorry. It was backwards. So Capture One is more of a shadow-based program, and Lightroom is much more of a highlight-based program. And just a really simple way to show that is look what happens when I mess with the highlight slider. I mean, not a whole lot is really happening over here. Come over here to the highlights, and you can really see there's so much more range in the highlights of Lightroom. However, in the shadows, look how little that's being affected. Meanwhile, look at this. I mean, it's massive. It's massive, right? So what does that mean? I mean, it's definitely something to take note of, especially if you feel like you're more comfortable like shooting in a certain way. Like I often shoot more on the dark side because modern cameras can pull so much detail out of the black. Whereas if you're blown out, it's gone, you know? So when I'm shooting, I really look at my histograms to sort of make sure that there's much more in the black than there is the white. It's the way I shoot. It works for me. You may be completely different. If you're a highlight-based person, you know, you might be way more inclined to use Lightroom. If you're a shadow-based person like I am, you might be more inclined to use the shadow slider, which is weird because I use Lightroom even though you would get better, you know, I think both sliders kind of even out to do the same thing, but you get more out of each particular slider. Okay, so highlights in Lightroom, shadows in Capture One. Here's another kind of interesting thing. Let's go. This is a great photo to sort of mess around with and look at. So do you know anything, or have you noticed anything like right off the bat? Look really, really, really close at these two. Because this is important. This is important. And maybe we should zoom in a little bit more, huh? You see it now? Look how much more noise is in the Lightroom side than there is in the Capture One side. That's pretty crazy. That is pretty crazy. And not only that, oh, actually, I should probably reset this, right? Yes, okay. So there we go. So, and I should reset this one. So now these are both at their import basics. And just look how much still in this dark area, look how much more noise there is than over here. And I don't know if you can see kind of up here where the little mouse cursor is in Lightroom. I don't think you can see it actually, but if you look here in the middle, I'm gonna zoom in, and we'll do the same over here. You can just see how much more noise is in the Lightroom version. Now there's an interesting sort of pro and con to this, maybe, however you want to sell this, but detail is also inferred through the noise because the noise has a sharpness and detail is sort of inferred. So if you look down here on the bottom ridge, that bottom edge, it does sometimes appear between the two versions like Lightroom has a little bit more detail, but it's at the cost of that extra noise. Now when you're zoomed all the way out, like let's say all the way out to here, I am not sure that it's a massive deal breaker. I don't know if anybody's gonna look between these two and be like, oh man, Lightroom is a mess. Like I think everything looks pretty normal. I mean, the first thing I would say is that I would go in here and look at that. I mean, like with these profiles, look at that portrait profile. Just how beautiful it is. And then on the standard profile, we're getting really similar results between the warmth. Obviously, Capture One is still a little bit more warm, but it's starting to be there. All right, so that's kind of a cool thing. And again, you know, if we come over here and I bring up And you can see there's like, you know, I'm not gonna lie to you, I think in this case, you know, if you go all the way to the right on the shadows and all the way to the left on the highlights between the two, I feel like Lightroom is giving you more of the dynamic range, or basically a much more flatter. Like if we almost have to go up on the highlights to equal where Capture One is on the far spectrum, on the far edge. But that's just that's an observation. So maybe Capture One. I mean, let me tell you right now, Capture One is definitely doing something I think is far superior in the noise department. And here's what my theory is. I think they have an algorithm, because most of your noise lives in shadows. And I think they have a really smart algorithm that deploys noise reduction below a certain threshold. And I think it's pretty cool. And I think that's on top of, they also have other noise reductions, like here's your, yeah, so they have luminance, detail, and that sort of noise reduction. I think, you know, Lightroom has some of that too, but if we were to put these both in the middle here, you know, you start to get a little bit of a weird effect coming out of Lightroom, where you start to really, again, I think zoomed all the way out, it would be fine. And in this very specific case, we now have less noise in the Lightroom version, but I also think it's obliterating. I think it's also obliterating a lot of the detail. You know what I mean? So that's, you know, maybe playing with these things, you'd be able to sort of bring that back. But look up here at the top. You know, in Lightroom, or I'm sorry, in After Effects, there's a little thing called vector blur, where it really starts to bring shapes together and sort of makes these almost this watery texture or cloud billowy texture. You can start to see that happening. Whereas over here in Capture One, you still have the original detail. So, you know, just something to think about. I think Capture One's noise handling is amazingly better. But I'm going to be honest with you, so far, I'm not going to call it one way or the other for color, because I think you can do a lot of what you're doing. I mean, like you look here, it's almost like, and you turn all the settings off, you'll notice at the top of the photos, there's a lot of noise in the Lightroom, but in the highlights, there's a lot more detail. So it's a toss off, but I think I would still probably give it to Capture One, because most people don't really get that close. And when you kind of get out to this point, you can't really tell a difference. But I still would give it to Capture One. But the color, I'm not giving it to anybody yet. I'm not going to give that to anybody. We got other things to do here. And we're going to come back when we're all done, because we have another example. But when we come back, we're going to come back to one of these images, and I'm going to floor you with a detail. One of these two programs at the end of this video has an amazing feature that will blow your mind. And I know that's kind of clickbaity, but trust me, it's I definitely want to save the best for last, okay? All right, let's go down to I got a friend here, Andrew. And I took a picture of Andrew a while ago, and I imported that over here as well. Let me just make sure. I went 14 of 72. All right, so here's 14 of 72. And everything is reset. Yep, okay. So these are straight out of the camera. Give you a full view of what's going on here. These are straight out of the camera, both of them. There's not a big difference. In this case, there's not a massive difference. I don't think you would look at one versus the other and be like, oh, you know, this one needs more help than the other. And just to prove that, you know, there's our ICC profile, and we're not in an ICC profile over here. You know, we're in the standard one. I'm going to go to camera matching. That's the first thing I'm going to do in Lightroom. And again, let's zoom in here. And there's not a huge difference. I think, in my opinion, this one is a little bit more orange. His skin tone is a little more orange. And over here, his skin tone is, it actually feels like it's heading a little bit. It's not purple, but you can see that. And that's also because Capture One is lauded for its skin tone handling. Apparently, people feel like its skin tone is unparalleled in photography. Let's see why. All right, so let's just start off and just before we get into the color, let's try some other things. You know, we've got some blemishes on the skin. Let's try Lightroom's spot removal. Let's just do remove spot. We'll just go around. And I will say, Capture One's little spot removal tool is actually usually, I've never had a whole lot of problems with it, but it's often really good. Like, you get a divot like that, it knows how to take care of it. I think we get the idea there. All right, so now let's come over here. We got a similar tool. Lightroom's capture, I mean, Lightroom's capture tool can be so strange. So let's, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it makes some really interesting decisions sometimes. And you're just like, what are you doing? You know, I'd say most of the times it works really well, but there's other times where it's like you're trying to get rid of a mole and it's like, oh, okay, well let's replace it with this mole. And it'll just give you a mole on top of your mole, and you're like, man, bro, we're trying to get rid of those. I'm not trying to match zit for zit. I'm trying to delete them. So, you know, the truth of the matter is, it's like they're pretty close. They're pretty close. You know, you can even see similar sort of weird artifacting. It's like, that one's not quite perfect, but it's not, it's actually better on the Lightroom side, but it's not quite perfect. This one here is a little bit discolored. That one's got a little bit of discoloration. Over here on the cheek, they both did pretty well. I mean, I missed a couple, but, you know, they're not exactly the same, but they're pretty close. So the spot removal tool is, you know, it's a little tit for tat. So no biggie there, no biggie there. That's what you're doing. You can use both programs. But what about skin color and skin tone? So here's something that's really cool. Let's say both of these look a little bit too red. I know I said this one's a little bit more orange and this one's heading more into the cooler tones, but we can fix that. And one of the nice things about Capture One is, like, if you click over here under the color editor, they have a tab for skin tone. And all you have to do is you have to click on it, sort of find the skin tone that you're liking. Like, we'll go with sort of this, and it gives us this range. And then we can start doing some really cool things. We can shift it way into the yellow. We can shift it way into the red. You know, I want to go a little bit more yellow, so I'm just going to move it over a little bit. Now we can really mess with the saturation. Now it's really saturated. Now it's really unsaturated. I kind of want to unsaturate it a little bit. I'm going to go that way. Now we can brighten the skin up a little bit. We can darken the skin up a little bit. I'm going to leave it about where it is. And then this uniformity slider is really cool, because what it will do is it'll try to match, because, you know, human skin is different. Like, so his cheeks are a little bit different color than, like, say, the bottoms of his cheeks are different than the top of his cheeks and his forehead. Everybody has, like, you get people with splotchy skin. This will even everything out. And it's hard to see because, as it turns out, you know, his skin is pretty even. But that saturation one is really cool because look, the highlights are very like white. But if we bring them in, the highlights start to take on the skin tone, and that's cool. This is a little bit of a mess. We're not going to mess with that. But, you know, we've made some really nice changes to his skin tone. Now, the thing is, it does more than that. It does, in fact, affect all of these things. So I think if we hold down Control... Oops. If you look at the building there in the top right-hand corner, you can see that it sort of shifts its color range. I mean, there are masking techniques in both programs, but I'm just letting you know, if you don't mask, you are going to be affecting more than just the skin tone. You're going to be affecting that whole color range, okay? It's a great tool to allow you to target the skin tones, but you're going to be affecting everything. So then the next question is, can we get a similar amount of steps? Can we get our Lightroom to have a similar skin tone? And so the first thing to notice is we moved how many sliders? 1, 2, 3. We didn't really mess with this one. 4, 5. And then we also selected the skin tones, okay? Now, we can do something similar down here, but you have to go to your HSL color area. It might look like either this, or I like to have all of them there. And then the next thing is, it's like we just need to perhaps move these sliders around so it matches. So the first thing is, I moved everything a little bit into the orange and the yellow. So I'm going to start by doing kind of the same thing. And then I desaturated. And then the luminance. And then there we go. So I messed now with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm basically messing with one more slider than Capture One. But I mean, are those going to be exact? No. I mean, it's two different processes. I'm eyeballing it. You know what I mean? But is that pretty darn close? If you only had Lightroom, could you do what Capture One does? Yes. If you only have Capture One, could you do what Lightroom does? Yeah. I mean, those are really, really close. You can hand these files off to anybody, and they would be very, very, I think, very happy with sort of how they sort of worked out. And you know, that's just it works, and we like things that work. So I guess in that case, you know, if you want to give the intuitiveness a score, a Capture One probably wins because there's a specific zone dedicated to it that allows you to really sort of mess with things, right? One of the big differences that has happened in a recent update to Lightroom, which I think is a major bonus because this did not exist that long ago, is that they did implement, hopefully, because I asked many times for this, they added the color grading wheels, which over in Capture One is referred to as color balance. And these are amazing. If you shoot film or anything, then you know these really, really well. And what these allow you to do is sort of affect zones of color really, really quickly. So it's like, you know, they got a highlight area or in the shadow and in the midtones, and we just affected the shadows on both of these. And you can see that there are differences, like the shadows for Capture One have a different threshold. So you can see here it really darkened up these areas of Andrew's skin where it really didn't touch them so much over here. And that's just because it's a different threshold, right? The same is going to be if we zero these back out. The same is going to be true for the midtones. You can see here that in Capture One's mind, the skins really all live here in these midtones for this photo. Whereas in Lightroom, you can see a lot of his skin detail in the shadows. Now that color is preserved, and only sort of these middle highlights are being affected. And then if we go to the highlight tab, you can see here that, again, a much more subtle effect on the Capture One side than on the Lightroom side. And is that a good or bad thing? I don't know. You know, I think that's a preference thing. I think these are the kinds of things that you just learn to work with, right? I think how far, or like where the thresholds are, because that's the big difference. You know, and when I say threshold, I mean, let's say you've got 256 shades of gray from black to white, and in between those are 254 shades of gray. When I say threshold, I mean like, I think, oops, somebody, am I missing phone calls? I don't know. I think that Lightroom might say, okay, we're affecting this group of grays, and maybe it goes from 0 to 50. Whereas Capture One might say, well, for shadows, we're only going from 0 to 30. And then for midtones, we're going from like 30 to 200. And Lightroom's going from 50 to like 190. You know what I mean? Like they have a different threshold. They manage these areas. They have different definitions of what shadow, highlight, and midtones are. So that's just something you would just need to learn. The next thing, though, is something that's really, really, really cool that I really enjoy about one of these programs. So let's go back. And I will go select our previous. And we'll just grab like this guy. I mean, it's not a great photo, but it's got colors in it. Oh, that's a terrible photo. We will not grab that one. Maybe this one? Oh boy. All right, we'll go with this one. All right. And this guy appears to be this one. All right. And then just to make sure everything's, we'll reset all settings. That one's all reset. So if you want to color grade these things, and let's say you want to make this sort of look really warm and you want it to be very sort of summery, what you might do in Capture One is go over to the shadows, warm them up, go to the midtones, warm them up, go to the highlights, warm them up, and then you can even start doing other things, like you can start selecting the green, and you can really, but see, like the greens and yellows, and that's by the way, that's normally true. For the most part, what you think of as green, almost all programs see as like yellow, so just keep that in mind. But you know, like it's that process, right? And so you can end up with sort of a very much more warm tone, and now it looks a little sunsetish. Now there's another way to do that in Lightroom, which I think is actually far superior. And what I'm doing right now is I'm just kind of looking to see here. Everything looks good. I just want to make sure that I'm not missing something. Nope. Let's go over here. I'm just making sure that they didn't add a special feature here, because that would be embarrassing. All right, here we go. So here's something that Lightroom does really well that Capture One doesn't. Which actually, right now, to be completely honest with you, I think makes Lightroom the winner in color space. And it's this calibration tool. Now, I don't know what the calibration tool is here for, to be honest with you. But it is phenomenal. So with these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sliders, you can do pretty much anything you possibly could ever want. And I will show you. So you want to make this a little more summery? Go like that. Go like that. And look how easy that was. And we ended up with photos that look very similar, but the truth of the matter is it was way easier in Lightroom, and it also affects, it's hard to tell because these actually turned out very similar, but it affects the surrounding colors in an appropriate way. When you are selecting and you're shifting them sort of away from the colors that you don't have selected. So when you're shifting the yellows into more orange hues, but there's a lot of blues, you're leaving the blues alone. The blues are staying where they are. However, when you're using the calibration tool, it takes the blues with you. So that way they are more in the correct space of what you're actually doing. And you can also use this to go back to Andrew real quick. Or maybe we have another one here. Like, here's a great example. Let's create a virtual copy. There's our virtual copy. And we will reset all settings. And forget about all the spots on his jacket. But you can see this is taken on a fall day. Well, how do we make it look more fall? We don't have to mess with any of these things. We don't have to mess with any of our HSL, where those things go. Right here. We don't have to mess with any of these sliders. All we have to do is mess with the calibration. So right off the bat, one slider, you look 100% better. And look at that. That's where like from where we started to where we are now, you just make it a 100%, like just a full 180 in terms of the way that it looks. And then of course, the last thing is you should always do look at that. I think like in the landscape, that just looks so much better. And just like that, everything just looks so much more fall-like. It just has that warmth. It took the shadows, right? Because that's another thing. The shadows might be other colors. Well, we've taken them, when we mess with that calibration, we've taken everything with us. And we haven't touched anything else. We just messed with these sliders. And what did we do? We did plus 39, minus 5, minus 11, minus 45. There's great videos out there that show you why these things are awesome and how to use it. But the truth is, you should just go out there and play with it. So, you know, that was like a 40-minute, like kind of like a blog, but just sort of a comparison, a modern comparison between Capture One and Lightroom. The truth is, there's a whole bunch of other features that we didn't get into. I just tried to get into the two big ones, which is the data asset management, which is way better for Lightroom, and then the color space, which I think a lot of people think Capture One is better for, but the truth is, I don't know. I don't know. I think if you're used to Capture One, you might be able to get more out of it. But if you can teach yourself the calibration tool, which is like literally moving 7 sliders, you might get better results out of Lightroom. And I think that's might be really surprising to some people, but that for me, that's what the truth has been, and I'm going to continue to use Lightroom here into the near future. So thank you guys so much. Have an amazing time. Please subscribe to my channel. Please like the video. I get no views. I have no views because I'm not part of the algorithm. I just do this quietly, for the few people who want to watch it. And, I just appreciated that you made it through this far, if you made it. So I will talk to you all soon. Have an amazing time, and enjoy the rest of your day.